Minutes left before his scheduled execution, Ethan Ward didn't ask for a final meal, a priest, or a phone call. He asked for something no one in the prison had ever heard before: to see the Navy SEAL who once saved his life, and the German Shepherd who saved it twice. That morning, the air inside Anchorage Federal Penitentiary felt unnaturally heavy, as if the concrete walls themselves were bracing for a truth long buried. Every sound, the metallic clink of keys, the echo of boots on the frozen floor, carried a tension that pressed on every guard's spine. Inside his dim cell, Ethan Ward sat on the edge of his cot, his lean face hollowed by 5 years of injustice. The scar down his cheek, the exhaustion in his brown eyes, all told the same story. The man who entered this place was gone, replaced by one who had fought too long to be believed. The guards expected the usual request: a warm meal, a last goodbye, one final letter. But when the warden asked, Ethan's voice was steady, almost fragile. "I want to see Logan and Shadow." A silence fell, a condemned man asking not for comfort, but for the soldier and the dog who once pulled him from death. Unheard of. But for Ethan Ward, they weren't memories. They were the only part of his life the world hadn't managed to take away. Chapter 1. Winter verdict over Anchorage. Snow drifted like pale ash across the frozen yard, the morning air sharp enough to bite through steel. Inside Anchorage Federal Penitentiary, Ethan Ward sat alone on the edge of his narrow cot, elbows on his knees, fingers locked together as if he feared his own hands might shake. The cell around him felt smaller than usual, though nothing had changed. The same cracked concrete, the same dull light flickering overhead, the same metal bars casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. Only he had changed. Today was the day the world stopped believing in second chances. Ethan's face, once strong, once full of command, had thinned out over the years. The sharp jaw remained, though now it carried weariness rather than confidence. A faint scar curved from his temple toward his cheek, a reminder of a desert ambush long before prison walls defined his life. His brown hair had grown uneven, coarse from stress and sleeplessness, and his dark eyes had become deep wells of quiet disbelief. He had shouted his innocence for 5 years. Then he whispered it, then he merely breathed it. And now, he wasn't sure if anyone could hear it at all. Outside the bars, a guard walked by, Officer Trent Miller, a young man with a soft jawline and sandy hair, who always tried to hide his discomfort around death row inmates. He wasn't cruel, just inexperienced and afraid of doing something wrong. He paused, cleared his throat awkwardly. "They're reviewing your final request now," Trent said, voice tight with pity he didn't dare express. Ethan nodded, though his gaze stayed fixed on the floor. Final request, final day, final breaths. The words crawled across his mind like cold chains. He tried to push them aside by calling forth the only warmth he had left: Logan Hayes. Ethan could picture the man clearly even after years apart, around 40, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying the worn strength of a Navy SEAL who had seen too much, but still stood tall. Logan's face had always been angular, marked by a square jaw and a dusting of neatly trimmed beard, with strands of silver brightening his temples. His deep brown eyes could be soft, almost brotherly, yet fierce enough to freeze a room when danger approached. He had walked with a slight stiffness in his left leg ever since the blast in Helmand Province. Ethan had been there. He remembered the smoke, the shrapnel, the smell of burned earth. He remembered thinking Logan wouldn't make it. And then Shadow appeared, dragging Logan clear from the collapsing wall. Shadow. The name alone made Ethan's throat tighten. Shadow had been barely a year old then, a strong, lean German shepherd with black and tan fur and fire in his amber eyes. Over time, the dog had grown into a formidable partner. 5 years old now, powerful, intelligent, disciplined beyond measure. Shadow never barked unless necessary, preferring quiet signals, steady posture, intense watchfulness. But when he recognized danger, he reacted like a bolt of lightning. He had been Ethan's dog first. Later, circumstances shifted, deployments changed, and Shadow was transferred to Logan's care. Ethan never resented it. Shadow loved them both, but Logan needed the dog more, and now Ethan needed them both. Footsteps echoed through the corridor, a heavier pair, slower, more authoritative. The warden. Warden Collins was a man in his late 50s, with gray hair slicked back too neatly, and a mustache trimmed with military precision. His posture was rigid, upright, the the posture of a man who believed in order, consequence, and systems more than individuals. He had never been unkind to Ethan, though never sympathetic either. He treated death row the way a surgeon treated a failing organ: necessary, clinical, unpersonal. He stepped to the bars, his breath clouding faintly in the cold draft seeping through the hallway. "Ward," the warden began, voice steady, "your final appeal has been denied." Ethan felt the words strike like a blunt blow to the ribs. He lifted his head slowly. "What is your last request?" For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His mouth opened, then closed. He inhaled once, long and thin. "I want to see Shadow," he said quietly, "and Logan, if he still remembers me." The guard beside the warden frowned in confusion. A dog? A Navy SEAL? On execution day? But the warden only studied Ethan's expression, a man stripped down to his final truth. After a long pause, he nodded. "I'll see what can be done." They left him alone again. Hours passed. Snow kept falling. Ethan sat in the visitation yard, chains loose around his wrists, breath turning white in the frigid air. Beyond the yard's far gate, visibility was almost zero, just the swirling white curtain of a full Alaskan storm. Hopelessness slithered through him, heavy and familiar. He had imagined this moment so many times, but never this emptiness, never this sharp ache of wanting to see the only beings who had believed him. He exhaled shakily. "Shadow. Logan, just once," he whispered. Then, a sound, soft, distant, but unmistakable. A low, gentle bark carried through the storm. Ethan's head snapped upward, breath caught in his chest. His heart slammed painfully against his ribs. Shadow's voice. It had to be. But was Logan with him, or was Ethan hearing a ghost of the past? The storm offered no answer. Chapter 2. The soldiers' return. Through the blizzard, the storm thickened as morning bled into a pale, icy gray. Snow wasn't falling anymore. It was charging, slashing sideways across the Alaskan highway like shards of glass. Logan Hayes gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles pale beneath the leather gloves. His old truck rattled with each gust, the engine groaning, but he kept driving, eyes narrowed beneath the shadow of his black knit cap. In the rear seat, Shadow stood braced against the shaking cabin, paws planted firmly, amber eyes glowing with the alertness of a seasoned service dog. The black and tan shepherd rarely vocalized, but now his low rumble cut through the storm's roar. He stared out at the side window, not in fear, but anticipation. The dog felt something in the air Logan couldn't yet name. Logan reached back with one hand, resting it briefly on the harness strap marked, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet." Shadow's muscles were tight, but his gaze was steady. He was ready to work, ready to protect. Logan swallowed hard. "Yeah, buddy," he murmured. "I know. We're almost there." The highway stretched ahead, a thin scar dividing endless sheets of white. Logan's breath fogged inside the truck, the heater fighting a losing battle against the cold. His left knee pulsed with a deep, familiar ache, the old battlefield injury that surfaced whenever the temperature dropped or memories flared. Today, both were doing their worst. For years, he had buried everything. The blast, the screams, Ethan pulling him out of the rubble before Shadow dragged them both clear. The investigation, the accusations, Ethan's sudden arrest, the nightmare that followed. Logan had tried to drown it all in silence, isolating himself in a remote cabin near Fairbanks, far from people, noise, questions. But last night, as the radio crackled with news of Ethan Ward's imminent execution, something inside Logan snapped awake. The world he'd tried to forget spun back into focus, sharp and merciless. He owed Ethan his life. Shadow owed Ethan his loyalty, and both owed him the truth. A flash of blue lights appeared ahead. A snowplow had overturned on the roadside, blocking half the highway. Logan slowed, maneuvering around the wreck. A state trooper waved him through. A woman in her late 30s with auburn hair pulled tightly into a bun. Her name tag read Officer Mara Ellison. Her cheeks were red from the wind, her eyes sharp with fatigue but alert. She leaned toward his window. "Road's barely passable," she warned. Her voice had a firm, grounded quality, the voice of someone who had spent years facing storms head-on. "Where are you headed in this hell of a morning?" "Anchorage Federal," Logan replied. Her brow tightened. "Execution day?" "Yeah." She studied him a moment longer, taking in the navy winter coat, the slight limp when he shifted, the veteran pin on his hat, and the serious working posture of Shadow behind him. "Be careful," she said finally. "Storm's only going to get worse." Logan nodded. "Thank you, officer." She stepped back, and he continued forward, tires crunching against frozen asphalt. He noticed in the mirror the officer watching until the truck disappeared into the blizzard. Something about that look felt unsettling. Not distrust, but concern, as if she sensed something larger swirling beneath the surface. Meanwhile, inside Anchorage Federal, Ethan waited in the Death Watch chamber, a sterile room with a metal table bolted to the floor and a narrow window looking out toward the execution block. His wrists were cuffed loosely in front of him, a gesture of pointless mercy. 2 guards flanked the door, one older and stiff-backed, the other younger with a nervous jawline. Ethan could feel their discomfort. He didn't blame them. He barely recognized himself either. The storm outside howled through the narrow vents, rattling the thin glass like a reminder of time slipping away. If Logan didn't come, no. He forced the thought away. He didn't need forgiveness. He didn't need explanations. He just needed to see Shadow's eyes one last time. Out on the highway, Logan's truck jolted as a large branch torn by the storm crashed behind him. He tightened his grip and pushed the accelerator. Every mile felt like a battle. His mind replayed the last phone call he'd had with Ethan. Years ago, filled with frustration and guilt, neither of them could articulate. He had promised to dig for answers. Then PTSD swallowed him whole. He did nothing. "Not again," he whispered to the empty road. "I'm not failing him again." Shadow pawed at the window, ears pricked. Logan followed the dog's gaze. Through swirling snow, the distant silhouette of the penitentiary appeared, dark, towering, impenetrable. He exhaled, a sound part relief, part fear. "We made it, boy." Shadow barked once, sharp, purposeful. Inside the facility, Ethan felt the air shift. It wasn't warmth or hope, just a feeling, an instinct honed through warfare and hardship. He straightened, heartbeat stuttering in his chest. A sound pierced the storm. A dog's bark. Familiar. Steady. Shadow. Ethan's breath caught. But another question stabbed deeper. If Shadow was here, was Logan, or had the dog come alone, guided by loyalty stronger than reason? He lifted his gaze toward the gate, vision blurring in the snow's white veil, and waited. Chapter 3. Shadow and the instinct that never lies. Snow swirled in a violent spiral as Logan pulled the truck to a halt near the outer security checkpoint. The moment his boots hit the icy pavement, Shadow leapt down beside him, body tense, ears pricked sharply forward. The 5-year-old shepherd didn't bark. He warned. A deep rolling growl vibrated in his chest, pulsing through the storm's roar like thunder locked in fur. Logan froze. Shadow never growled without cause. The dog's amber eyes had locked onto a figure emerging from the inner gate, a tall man in a dark tactical coat, his steps crisp, his jaw set like stone. Carl Donovan. Even from a distance, the man radiated a rigid, authoritarian energy. He had the kind of face that looked carved rather than grown. Sharp cheekbones, thin lips, and narrow eyes that never seemed to blink. A faint scar traced along his left jawline, as if someone once tried to silence him with a blade. His hair was short, steel-colored despite his age being somewhere in the early 40s, and his movements carried the precision of a man trained to control a room by merely entering it. But Shadow saw something else, something human eyes couldn't catch. Donovan hesitated when he spotted Logan and Shadow, and that hesitation, tiny, barely a quarter second, sent Shadow into a deeper growl, his front legs stiffening. Logan tightened his grip on the leash. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though his own instincts were spiraling awake. "Show me what you see." A young guard hurried toward them, Private Dean Harper, barely in his 20s, with freckles dotting his round cheeks and fear widening his pale blue eyes. His posture was slouched from exhaustion, suggesting he had been on the double shift, and his hands fidgeted nervously at his belt. "Sir," Harper stammered, leaning close to Logan. "Your dog, he never reacts like this unless something's wrong." Logan nodded slowly. "Tell me." The guard swallowed, glancing nervously toward Donovan. "Rumor is, he tried to erase some mission files connected to your buddy's case. People say he was there the night of the explosion, but none of it made it into the official report." He lowered his voice. "Sir, I think Ethan Ward was framed." Before Logan could respond, Shadow jerked forward with sudden force, teeth bared. Donovan had turned away, attempting to retreat toward the administrative wing. The shepherd lunged, dragging Logan 2 steps across the snow. Only the tight grip of the harness kept Shadow from reaching the officer outright. Donovan spun sharply, fury flaring in his eyes. "Control your animal!" Logan's voice cracked like ice. "He knows what you did." The older man's face drained of color, only for a moment, but it was enough. Logan stepped forward, placing himself between Donovan and the dog, jaw hardened. "Carl," he said, voice low, deliberate, almost gentle in its threat. "You handled the device last. Everyone saw you. And now you're running from a dog who never once misread a man's intentions." Donovan's nostrils flared. Snowflakes clung to his lashes like ash. "You don't know what you're talking about," Shadow barked, a single sharp note that sliced clean through the storm. The bark of truth. Harper startled. "Sir, Shadow only does that when he confirms danger. We learned that from his service file." Logan felt something ignite in him, a flicker of power he hadn't felt since the battlefield days when a SEAL team looked to him for decisions that determined life or death. He raised his voice. "I need to speak with the warden, now." Donovan backed away another step. Not much, but enough for Shadow to surge forward again, this time fast as lightning. Teeth snapped around the fabric of Donovan's pant leg, ripping through the material. The officer stumbled backward, shock breaking his composure. "Get this dog off me!" Donovan roared. Shadow stood firm, growling, the kind of growl that came from the deepest part of a shepherd, bred to sense lies and danger long before humans could. Logan yanked the harness, pulling Shadow back just enough to prevent escalation. But the message had been sent. "Ethan was set up," Logan shouted over the wind. "You know it, and Shadow knows it." Donovan's expression twisted. Anger, fear, guilt, all warring across a face that had always been too controlled. "I don't have to listen to this," he spat, turning away in a hasty stride. But Shadow wasn't finished. The dog lunged once more, teeth snapping in the air as Logan restrained him, snow erupting beneath their boots. The shepherd's stance was rigid, body angled protectively toward Logan while still tracking Donovan's retreating form. Instinct, training, memory, all converging into one message. This man is a threat. Logan's breath shook, his mind racing, pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. 5 years of doubt, guilt, and silence suddenly aligned. Donovan fled through the swirling snow toward the inner gate, and Logan knew. Shadow hadn't just recognized danger, he had recognized the truth. It was time to bring it to the warden. Chapter 4. The chase through the white night. The alarm blared like a wounded beast, its metallic howl slicing through the narrow corridors of Anchorage Federal. Red lights pulsed along the ceilings, splashing the walls with frantic color as Logan sprinted after Shadow. Snow hammered against the tall windows, each gust rattling the reinforced glass like fists demanding entry. Shadow ran ahead with laser precision, nose low, tail straight, every muscle locked into working mode. The shepherd's paws hardly made a sound on the cold concrete, his breath rhythmic, controlled. He wasn't chasing noise. He was following truth, drawn forward by the scent of fear Donovan left behind. Logan followed close, limping slightly from the old battlefield injury, but adrenaline sharpened his stride. His navy coat swayed behind him, catching bursts of red emergency light that flickered like fire across his shoulders. He could feel the entire prison tightening, gates closing, backup guards rushing, radios crackling with confusion. "Contain the inmate wing!" someone shouted over the intercom. "Inmate is still secure," another voice replied. "The disturbance is external." External. Donovan. They rounded a sharp corner and nearly collided with a technician scrambling out of the security hub. She was in her mid-30s, lean but not fragile, with a mop of curly dark brown hair pulled into a messy bun. Her name tag read Sarah Bennett. Her olive skin had gone pale under stress, and her large, thoughtful eyes flickered with both fear and calculation. She clutched a stack of folders in her arms, hands trembling. "What's happening?" Logan demanded. Sarah pushed her glasses up her nose, breath fogging in the cold draft. Officer Donovan triggered a system-wide lockdown. Then he forced his way into the control room. She swallowed hard. "He said he had to finish something." Shadow growled softly beside Logan, pacing, waiting. Sarah's lips tightened as she added, "Donovan took a handgun from the locked emergency safe. I didn't think he'd actually use it." "You did nothing wrong," Logan said sharply, sensing the guilt forming in her eyes. "Point me toward the control room." She pointed down the corridor with a shaky hand. "End of the hall, left. But be careful, he's not stable." Logan nodded once, and Shadow surged forward again. As they approached the control room, the air changed. Tenser, colder, charged with threat. Shadow's growl deepened, his body lowering into a combat-ready stance. Logan could hear the echo of someone pacing inside, then a clatter, then a curse. When they reached the doorway, Logan pressed his back to the wall and peeked inside. Donovan stood alone in the center of the room, illuminated by flickering monitors. His tactical coat was ripped where Shadow had latched on earlier. His hair was disheveled for the first time, and his face twisted in a storm of panic and fury. The handgun in his grip shook slightly, just enough for Logan to know the man was unraveling. "You don't understand," Donovan shouted to no one, voice cracking. "Ward can't live. He can't. If he talks, if the truth comes out, everything I built will collapse." Shadow let out a low warning rumble. Donovan spun toward the door, eyes wild. "You and that cursed animal, you should have stayed gone, Hayes." Logan stepped in slowly, hands raised. "Put the gun down, Carl. It's over." "It's not over," Donovan yelled, waving the gun wildly. "Not until Ward is dead." That was all Shadow needed. The shepherd sprang forward in an explosion of muscle and precision. The world seemed to snap into slow motion. Shadow's paws leaving the floor, Donovan's eyes widening, Logan lunging behind them. Shadow slammed into Donovan's chest, knocking him backward. The gun fired, but the bullet went wide, burying itself into a bank of monitors that burst into sparks. Donovan crashed hard onto the concrete, the weapon flying from his grasp. Shadow held him pinned, teeth clamped to the sleeve of his jacket. Not tearing, just anchoring, restraining. Logan moved fast, retrieving the gun and sliding it across the floor, far from Donovan's reach. "You're done," Logan said, breath heavy. "All of it. Every lie." Donovan fought weakly, but couldn't break free. "You don't know what you're talking about. There is no proof." Logan slammed his hand on the main console. Screens flickered back to life, revealing folders Donovan had tried to bury. Mission logs, personnel records, a forensic analysis report, and one file Donovan had almost wiped entirely, until the partial data reconstructed itself. Sarah Bennett entered behind Logan, her eyes sharpening. "Wait, that's the explosives audit. And this is the uniform residue log." She pointed, voice steadier now. "The chemical traces match Donovan's gear, not Ward's." Donovan stilled. The fight left his face like breath from a corpse. A retired special operative's affidavit appeared next, signed and time-stamped, stating Donovan had threatened Ward before deployment. The truth was complete. Logan inhaled sharply. "We're done here." He picked up the intercom handset. "Warden Collins, halt the execution. Now!" For a moment, the storm outside roared louder than any human voice. Then the warden's voice cut through the static, commanding and fierce. "Red alert! Stop all procedures. Ward's execution is canceled immediately." Logan exhaled, shoulders dropping. Shadow loosened his grip on Donovan's sleeve, stepping back as if satisfied that justice had finally found its path. The night was still white with fury, but inside the control room, something had shifted. Truth had awakened. Chapter 5. Dawn on snow and a life returned. The execution chamber had never felt colder. The lights buzzed overhead with a sterile hum, the kind that made the room feel more like a forgotten morgue than a place of law. Ethan Ward lay strapped to the padded table, his breath shallow, fogging slightly in the frigid air that seeped through the vents. Two technicians stood nearby, one older, balding, with deep-set eyes, the other a woman in her late 20s, with a slim figure, copper hair pulled tightly into a bun, freckles dotting her pale cheeks. Her name tag read Allison Marks. She looked terrified. Her hands kept trembling as she rearranged the medical tray, betraying a gentle-hearted person forced into a job she barely believed in. The older technician, Donald Pierce, had a face carved from decades of procedure. A thick gray mustache hid most of his mouth, and wrinkles fanned out from his eyes that had watched too many last breaths. He worked mechanically, not out of cruelty, but from the self-protective numbness of a man who had seen too much to remain whole. He barely looked at Ethan. "Final checks," Pierce muttered. Ethan didn't respond. His lips moved, but no words came, not until a moment later when something deep inside him cracked open, and he whispered the only name that mattered. "Shadow." It came out barely audible, a breath rather than a word, a prayer disguised as a memory. Allison paused. "Whose shadow?" she asked softly. Ethan closed his eyes. "My dog." Something in the way he said it, fragile, reverent, made the young woman's expression falter. Before Pierce could begin the protocol, the steel door at the far end of the chamber slammed open with a violent crash. A rush of cold air swept in, carrying snowflakes and chaos. Logan Hayes stormed inside, boots hammering against the floor, his navy coat flaring behind him like a cresting wave. His jaw was tight, beard dusted with frost, and his dark eyes burned with a mix of fury and desperation. Shadow bounded at his heels, muscles rippling under his black and tan coat, harness straps glinting under the fluorescent light. "Stop!" Logan shouted. "Stop everything!" Allison gasped. Pierce's hands froze mid-motion. Ethan's eyes flew open. Shadow launched forward, skidding slightly on the polished floor before reaching the table. He pressed his head into Ethan's chest, whining, ears pinned back, breath frantic. His body trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming panic of nearly losing the man he had once saved on a battlefield far away. Ethan's body convulsed as a sob tore from him. His hands, still loosely restrained, twitched, trying to reach for Shadow. Logan moved to the table and gripped Ethan's shoulder. "It's over, brother. We found the truth." Behind him, the door burst open again. Warden Collins strode in, his face pale, his voice steady but strained. "Ward," he declared, "you are exonerated. The charges against you have been dropped. We owe you an apology that words aren't enough to cover." Ethan sagged against the table, the weight of years collapsing into one trembling exhale. Tears rolled down the sides of his face, not of grief, but release. Shadow remained pressed against him, a silent sentinel. A week later, Anchorage thawed into a softer shade of winter. Snow still covered the ground, but the air no longer bit. It breathed. Ethan stood outside the federal courthouse wearing borrowed clothes. A gray sweater too big in the shoulders, jeans that didn't quite fit. But he didn't care. Freedom made every thread feel like gold. Logan stood beside him, his stance relaxed for the first time in years. The navy coat hung open, revealing the red-black flannel shirt beneath. His beard had been trimmed, and the silver at his temples caught the morning light like frost woven into dark stone. Shadow sat between them, posture dignified, ears soft, eyes calm. The dog looked between the two men as if ensuring the world had finally balanced correctly. A federal judge, a woman in her 50s with short silver hair and warm brown skin, had just announced Ethan's official exoneration. Her name was Judge Clarissa Monroe, a calm, thoughtful presence with a gentle voice but piercing eyes. She had reviewed every scrap of evidence, her sense of justice sharpened by 3 decades of navigating both truth and lies. She had extended her hand and said simply, "No one deserves what happened to you, Mr. Ward. Live well." Ethan had no words then, only gratitude. Now, standing in the snow-striped sunlight, he reached down and stroked Shadow's head. "You saved me twice, 3 times. I've lost count," he whispered. Shadow nudged his hand with his nose, amber eyes glowing with that unmistakable mixture of loyalty and intelligence. "I'm here," the dog seemed to say. Ethan looked at Logan. "Thank you for coming back for me." Logan's voice softened. "I never should have left in the first place." The wind blew gently across the clearing, stirring their footprints in the snow. For a moment, everything felt weightless, like the world had paused to welcome a man home. The 3 of them, a freed soul, a wounded soldier, and a dog who never forgot, walked slowly down the long white road toward the rising sun. A new life, bright as the dawn, waited ahead. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. Sometimes they come in the form of a loyal friend, a brave soldier, or a dog who refuses to give up. In Ethan's darkest moment, help came exactly when it was meant to. Some call it fate, but many of us know it's God's timing. When life feels impossible, hold on. God never forgets his children, and he sends light even into the coldest nights. If this story touched you, like, comment, and share the video. Subscribe for more stories of hope, loyalty, aim, and faith. May God bless you and your family today. Amen.